Today, we're jumping into the epic history of Vietnam. And really, it's a story that's all about one powerful idea. This incredible, unbreakable spirit of resistance that just shows up again and again and again over thousands of years. So let's start with the one question that frames this entire story. It's not just about surviving, right? It's about identity. I mean, how do you go through a full millennium of foreign domination and somehow come out the other side still being you? Well, that story begins with the first great test, a 1,000-year period of rule by Vietnam's enormous neighbor to the north, China. This era set the stage for everything that would ever come after. To get a feel for the scale of this, just look at these dates. We're talking from 111 BCE all the way to 939 CE. For over 1,000 years, the land we think of as northern Vietnam was basically a province of China. But look closer. That long period was never, ever peaceful. It was constantly broken up by major rebellions. And here's the absolute key takeaway from that entire millennium. Even after 10 centuries, the Chinese policy of Sinicization, their effort to make the Vietnamese people Chinese, it just didn't work. It failed. A completely distinct Vietnamese culture just refused to be stamped out. So how on earth did they do that? Well, it was this constant tug of war. From the top down, China was imposing its written language, its form of government, and its customs. But at the village level, from the bottom up, the Vietnamese people held on tight. They kept speaking their own language. They kept their local festivals alive. And whenever they had a chance, they rose up. This resistance wasn't just some vague, passive thing. No, it was led by these incredible heroic figures. You had the Trung sisters back in 40 CE. After the Chinese executed one of their husbands, they rallied the local lords, kicked the occupiers out, and ruled as queens. What a powerful symbol of defiance. And it's a story that still inspires people in Vietnam today. So what happens after 1,000 years of that struggle? When freedom was finally won for good in 939 CE, the Vietnamese didn't just try to turn back the clock. Instead, they started this remarkable project of building a brand new, powerful nation of their own. And here's the really clever part. They didn't just throw out everything Chinese. Nope. They actually took some of the best Chinese systems, like a professional government workforce chosen by exams, and used those very tools to build their own strong, independent state, which they named Dai Viet. It's like they took the enemy's playbook and used it to become stronger themselves. The strength of this new kingdom was about to be put to the ultimate test because, in the 13th century, the Mongol armies of Kublai Khan, the guys who had already conquered China and most of Asia, invaded Dai Viet 3 separate times. And 3 times, the Vietnamese drove them back. It was an absolutely astonishing military victory. So for centuries, Dai Viet held its own. But by the 1800s, that old cycle started all over again, this time with a new power from halfway around the world. The French arrived, and they brought with them a totally different, and in many ways, a much more sinister kind of domination. You see, unlike the Chinese, who mainly wanted to make Vietnam culturally and politically Chinese, the French were there for one primary reason: money. It was all about economic exploitation. The whole point was to turn Vietnam into a machine that produced raw materials and profits for France. And the human cost of that system, you can kind of boil it down to this one stark number: 50%. By the early 1900s, French policies had created a situation where half of all Vietnamese families owned no land at all. They were forced to work as tenants on fields that had probably belonged to their own families for generations. This chart just lays bare the twisted logic of the whole system. The bar on the left, that's rice exports shooting through the roof, making French companies rich. But the bar on the right tells the real story. At the exact same time, the amount of rice the average Vietnamese farmer actually got to eat was going down. They were literally exporting their own food while they went hungry. The social damage was just as bad. Before the French, literacy was pretty common. But by 1939, after decades of the French so-called civilizing mission, 80% of the population couldn't read or write. The French basically engineered a society with no native middle class, no political rights, and no real path for anyone to get ahead. So it's really no surprise that this brutal system reignited that old spirit of resistance. But this was a new world, and this time the resistance was going to look very, very different. The whole idea of resistance evolved. The early fighters just wanted to kick the French out and bring back the emperor. But this new generation of nationalists had a completely different vision. They wanted to build a modern country, an independent republic, and they planned to use the West's own tools, science, technology, political ideas, to do it. You had pioneers like Fan Boi Chao. He totally embodied this new way of thinking. He saw that the future wasn't about going back to the past. He started smuggling young Vietnamese students to Japan so they could learn modern science and how to organize politically, the exact skills you'd need to fight a modern revolution. Out of all this activity, a new, incredibly disciplined and effective force began to emerge. It was organized by a man we now know as Ho Chi Minh. He managed to unify all these scattered nationalist groups into one single communist party, which got very, very good at channeling all that peasant anger into huge, organized uprisings. And that brings us to this critical turning point, right as the world is about to plunge into World War II. That ancient spirit of resistance was back. It was stronger than ever, but now it was armed with modern ideas. The centuries-old quest for freedom was on again, but it raised that same old question with a whole new set of possible answers. What would independence actually look like this time? I'd like you to stay tuned for the follow-up on this fascinating topic. But for now, you can subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you can keep on learning about Vietnam. In the next video, I will show you what to do in Hanoi in 3 days.